Yes, yes, yes. Hello, 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 Godspeed you. It is very nice. Just you. Yes, I have been meaning to go over. I have been meaning to go over the whole Fredda thing. Um, Fredda versus Metatron thing. Although, you know, it is. It is what it is. But, yeah. Hello, Moanoa. It's so good to see you. Today I'm going to be PNG streaming just because I am not in the mood to stream to do all the stuff I usually have to do to stream otherwise, but I think the Wiggler's nice anyway, so regardless, uh, let's see here. So I mean it was either this or we literally start watching Alan Dershowitz's commentary of the Nuremberg trials. I think I made the right decision. I would like to think I did. But anyway, I hope everyone is doing well today. Oh, it's been rather interesting. So I don't know. People have been really keeping up with like the whole what the idea of watching Alan Dershowitz comment on the well, this is old Alan Dershowitz, right? This is like back when he still had his fro and he was still like, back then. Like this was back in the 90s. This was like around 1995, I think. Yeah, 1995. Like this is like my first encounter with Alan Dershowitz was when C-SPAN did the whole special on the Alan Dershowitz. He's an infamous lawyer in the United States. This is what, and I say that because again, a lot of people will say, very famously defended, Epstein, right, and stuff like that. So, yeah, I made the right decision. Okay, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it. Okay. So, transitioning over. Epstein enjoying the lawyer says what? I know, but his commentary on the Nuremberg trials is just so different from everything else. It's just like when I first think of him, my first two references to him is the 90s, him commenting on this. And it's funny too because he does try to play it both sides, like, and he tries to be like, oh, he tries to make it seem like the Soviet Union wanted summary execution for whatever reason. And it's just like, the British wanted summary execution. What are you talking about? But, that's, he will do what he does. Yeah, Dershowitz, yeah. You could always put on both simultaneously to a min-max stimulation appeal to the Zoomers. Oh gosh, no. Yeah, he defended Epstein. That's why I'm saying, like, okay, if we were to, wait, here. Let me put this on a different window. Because I feel like this is this is going to be distracting for me. Okay, there we go. But yeah, he defended Epstein. Famously got an agreement, right? That essentially absolved, him, the lawyer, well, Dershowitz. Again, you can look for this for yourself. In the circuit court of the state of Florida, had a deal. This was done in 2007, I want to believe, that essentially got him and quote any potential, right, co-conspirator, right, and this was essentially like it was up to Epstein and Dershowitz to determine who counts as a co-conspirator. Essentially, puts the ability to have them be given immunity, right? To be granted immunity was done that way, right? So anyway, that's a little bit of legal history, but like I'm not joking. Like I literally was going over the Nuremberg stuff earlier, because I've been going into some stuff regarding hybrid tribunals. So, okay. So we will begin now with the whole Fredda situation. Let me know if people need anything. If the sound's okay, I can always make it louder. I don't. So, from what I understand, Fredda is Norwegian, um, and I so that's why it's in Temple Ridderen, right? Like, hence why it's like that. But I really do like this cover. I think it's really cool. I don't know. It's you know me with my when it comes like the dome. So if you've ever seen the Al Aqsa Mosque, but it has dark colored domes. Those the Temple of the Rock, or Dome of the Rock, I should say. It usually is thought of as always having that golden dome, but actually it used to be dark like the rest of the Haram al Sharif, right? So I don't know. That's just. Oh, it's not up on stream. My bad. That's on me, for sure. There we go. That's why it says Temple Ridderen. But yeah. So you can see that it has like a golden dome, and it has the cross, right? A Latin cross, which would also be weird. But still. But yeah, I do like the cover though. I do think the cover looks interesting. But because I think these would be the Knights of St. John, right? Because they have the Maltese cross. But still, the point being that the Dome of the Rock did not have this until the 20th century. So, just something to put out there.
Kid and later in life read James Clavell's Shogun. In my teenage years, I played Shogun 2 Total War and Crusader Kings 2. I'm sure.
Okay, so this is the game that I have been told I should play. Well, Crusader Kings. I don't know about Shogun, but Crusader Kings. I've been told it's really good. I think I might have played it before. Maybe, I think so. But, yeah, I mean, it seems interesting.
This kind of thing tracks for many of you as well. In terms of actually learning about this stuff, I didn't really have much of an idea where to start. Enter youtube.com. The early algorithm and my...
Oh my gosh, I remember... Wait. Wait a second. It did not used to say Gabriel, right? It used to just say start, right? I'm not misremembering that. Shogun 2 is good. Crusader Kings 2 and 3 are also good. Okay. But it used to say just start, right? You couldn't edit it to make it say Gabriel or whatever. I don't know why that's like, I don't know, sticking out to me for some reason. But
more sword and HEMA-obsessed friends very quickly started serving me videos from seemingly knowledgeable individuals talking directly into a camera and occasionally showing off their swords. Then, as I began my undergrad...
Gosh, that sounds so horrible. There's a person right now that I recently started watching that does actually... It's interesting because they are always breaking the fourth wall, even though they're trying to do this whole, like they're trying to do it as though they're, in the moment, right? But they keep breaking the fourth wall. It's good. It's interesting stuff because they go over like every inch of, possible. I got my trans ally shirt in the mail. Awesome. Oh, that's wonderful. And also welcome in, Gengaros. It's good to see you. I'm too young to know. Maybe because he's Norwegian. Maybe, I don't know. I've never seen it look. I've never seen it say Gabriel before.
studies and started learning more not just about history but also about how history is written, I started getting bored with these videos, verging on actively disliking some of them. I started noticing that a lot of the channels often relied heavily on rationalization and logic, not on evidence or sources. This is a phenomenon that
This happens all the time, where people say, do you think that this could have occurred? They don't show you any evidence, no citations, nothing. They're just like, let's just think it through. The issue is that people can, like, I understand, obviously I'm not saying logical reasoning is bad, right? In fact, there was this book I was reading, yes, I remember. It was Sarah Payne's book, she was on this podcast, by Dwarkesh Patel, right? And essentially, she starts talking about a certain group in, post-World War I Japanese history. And in effect, what she starts to argue is that, and maybe we might go over a Sarah Payne video afterwards, because I actually had someone who had watched VODs, who had also been in the chat, but also had watched some VODs where I talked about Japan. I think when we talked about What If Alt Hiss back in the day, talking about Japan. And she essentially talks about how they stopped believing in logic, and she just starts to say these claims literally from nowhere, like apropos of nothing, and just completely doesn't cite anything. For one, like, if I'm reading the introduction to your book, and I say this because, if I'm reading the introduction to a book and you're laying out these terms and you're not really explaining them what they are until like halfway through the book, I don't know. I feel like the introduction should explain what you mean by, like a merchant empire and a land-based empire, things like that, because unless it's like one-to-one intuitive, like, oh, a landlocked country can only be a land-based empire or something, it doesn't really make any sense, especially because she argues the United States went from being a land-based empire to a sea-based empire, which is just a whole different thing. But still, she talks about this one group, like the state Shintoist group, being in Japan, that eventually they come to reject the logic. And anyway, I'm not trying to be like that caricature that Sarah talks about. Instead, I'm trying to be like, you can thought experiment your way into a lot of things, right? That's why you can't just only rely on reasoning alone, right? There's this German guy, who among other things, right, wrote some, and of course he doesn't mean criticism, right? He means critique in a different sense, right? But you have people like, you have Horkheimer, right? The critique of practical reason, of instrumental reason, and then you of course have Kant, right? And you have these, very, well, anyway, I won't go too far into that, because lately the only thing I've read as of late has been the critique of judgment, which is mostly to do with like taste and aesthetics, which is a whole different story. But still, point being, you shouldn't rely on logic alone. Like, you can't just thought experiment your way through everything, right? But do you think they would have done something like that? Is it logical, sir? Have you met people? We are so... Exactly, DJ. Exactly. That's the problem with when you're only dealing with people that will I forget who says this, but like, there was one person in their video that said like, this logic lord, quote unquote, right? And I'm like, I kind of get what you mean, because there are people that think that you can just like, well, if I do it all in my head, right, with no evidence, no citations, nothing else, if I just think about it, I can figure out where it would otherwise go wrong. And it's like, no, you really can't. And that's it's an issue.
I observe with a lot of reenactment content on YouTube. They sometimes use primary source materials as a jumping off point, but from then on begin to rationalize how, quote, things worked back then based on their own personal experience. You might hear them say something like, if they did X,
Yeah. Oh wait.
then Y would happen. That doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, like exactly the a priori thing, how things worked back then. One, I mean, again, I like to say like Tuio's work, right, does a really good job at doing this. Like we create, like he writes in his book on like the power of like how we construct the past by remembering, right? We construct history by remembering. So to say how things worked back then already means that you start to think of things as we think of things, right? This is similar to things I've said before, right? Like with Engels, right? And his point in the foundations of the family, private property, and the state, right? Where people read the Bible now, right? Particularly the Jewish Bible, sometimes called the Old Testament, and they think when they talk about Abraham's family that it's a nuclear family, and it's like, no, we know that it's describing a tribal society, or rather we should understand it as a tribal society transitioning into a slave society, and that's really what's going on, right? That's what you have, like Adam and Eve, it's a story of the division of labor, blah, 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 right? It's a justification for it, right? But regardless, the main thing is that even Engels realized that, and was able to argue, that when people look back in the Bible, they think that, like, Adam and Eve had a nuclear family relationship, or Abraham had a nuclear family relationship. And that's where, like, when people, and I brought this up before, right, when it comes to Lot and his quote-unquote daughters, right, they think that they're direct blood relations, and it's like, no, all girls of the group, of the clan he would have been part of, would have called him father, right? That's the reason why we, like, all of the Jewish people, quote-unquote, call Abraham Avenu, right? Like, Abraham, our father, right? Or, or Moshe Avenu, right? Like, we say our father, right? And that's why they're referred to as the patriarchs, right? Things like that. Hello, Cat. It's good to see you. It also feeds into survivorship bias. Yeah, exactly. We didn't all have these vaccines back then, and we were finally. No, you weren't. Yeah. Off topic, but Silk Song. That sounds familiar. Why have you brought that up before, or am I misremembering? Either way, is that that sounds interesting. I do remember somebody brought it up, but
So they probably did Z. It's all argumentation and deduction based on what they believe, their preconceived notions, and their experiences. This approach to history can very quickly become problematic for many different reasons, but with these YouTubers I think something unique starts to happen. When the so-called history that they teach doesn't have to be backed up or justified by its connection to the sources, and when their personal experience takes primacy, then they start to believe themselves to be far more knowledgeable and qualified than they actually are. They begin to quote-unquote reason themselves towards every answer. And for some reason, the end result of this development almost always looks like an hour-long video essay about why women don't belong in video games.
Oh my gosh. This is so true. Interesting. Hollow Knight. Ah, okay. No, but this is so true. Like, it's always like now, right? Like, you will see, like, why is it that people back in the past were so concerned about X? And it's like, well, they weren't. It's that you're reading that into the past, right? And so it's like when people talk about, like, ethnic groups now in the past, right? Like Russians 1,000 years ago, like, or whatever, right? Like the English, or the, it's like those things did not exist as concepts. Like they aren't an eternal thing that can go back. But the issue is that for the reification, one might say, Oh my gosh, 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 oh my gosh. Ah. Oh my gosh. I thought I was gonna keep looping, my bad. Oh, goodness gracious. Yes, please. No. No, it doesn't say anything. It's just weird. Because it's me talking. Anyway, sorry about that. It's supposed to be on a loop. Let me just move it back down. Sorry, my bad. No, yeah, it's fine. It's just like, it was just weird. It's just random stuff. So anyway. Sorry about that. Yeah, it's a sequel to Hollow Knight. Ooh, okay, I see now. I didn't know that Lot and his daughters. Do you think that's the reason why he did what he did? He didn't care about them like a father who raised and loved his daughter. Well, yeah, but also like that care and love of his own daughters, right? Like that's the thing that developed afterwards, right? Because like that closeness was something that was, like I said, like developed afterwards, right? Like once we have the nuclear family, that's when you begin to have the more typical relationships that we understand of now. But back then, they weren't understood in that way. So, but another thing too is like, so it's like how, like Abraham's daughters would have called Lot father too, right? But like, you know, when they make a big deal about how they separated and then they started off their own thing, that was usually like once a clan size or something got big enough to where then it could support its own self with intermarriage between the two different clan groups, etc., etc. It's like once they ran out of a certain amount of land or a certain amount of whatever, right? It's like that's what would, so there wouldn't be the same kind of, because another thing too is children were raised like like that phrase, like it takes a village to raise a child. It's like, well, that captures a reality that just doesn't exist anymore, right? And so that's the main thing about it, I guess. But yeah.
The plan here is to revisit 3 channels that I watched something like a decade ago, those being Lindy Beige, Metatron, and Shadiversity, to see where they are.
I don't think I've ever watched, I've only, hello, people having, hello Simon, hope you're doing well, hello Aerolix, people having stuff reading. Do you believe David and Jonathan's story was describing gay lovers? I mean, only insofar as we can say, like now, what we describe as being, you know, again, this is why sometimes I don't like to have to take the step back, but let's take the step back of, if we're gonna take the modern identity category, quote unquote, right, of gay, right, and, you know, put it back into the past. Oh, good, I'm glad. And yeah, no, I haven't streamed in a while because I've been really busy and I was actually working 2 jobs and it was kind of difficult to do both jobs and also stream because I wasn't going to do the whole 2 jobs and streaming thing again because that was very difficult. But glad to be here. But I do think that in that sense, right, if we're going to take the archetypical story of David and Jonathan, yeah, I definitely think that you could say that. But again, yeah, for sure. That's so interesting because as a cis woman, you're raised in an environment where motherhood is discussed, and you understand this connection. A person who gives birth to their child has their young kid, so it's strange to think that fathers. Well, because another thing too is like now, paternity is seen as immensely important, right? And back in the day, it wasn't as important because there was no way for it to be proved, right? Like, there was no way for you to say these children, right, pertain to this father, right? You could only tell who was the mother, and because of that, that is why, like, for example, Judaism still does this, right, where we trace everything, right, and that's why we trace everything through the mother, right, where if the mother is, yeah, because the importance was the clan, exactly, centered clan car, whereas before, right, like, and again, it can be difficult for us to imagine, like, our fathers, right, like, not caring about us, but it's a whole different living arrangement, right? Like, we're not nomadic peoples living on, the hills of the Levant, right? That live in a kind of, like I said, like a nomadic existence, right? As is being described in the Jewish Bible, right? Very, very different, where everything is about, like, the ownership of sheep and goats, and, right? Instead, we have a completely separate thing. But the main thing was that matrilinearity, right? That's how, again, you have a lot of cultures that still do that, right? We have a lot of matrilineal cultures, if we can even call them that, but very few matriarchal cultures that we have remnants over, that we have in existence in that way. Yeah, I just never thought of who men in tribe viewed children, because people always talk about how all the women cared for all the children. I kind of inferred maybe men felt the same, but no. Well, it was just okay. Well, I mean, it was just a different thing. Like, again, if they view everybody, like, if you view your uncle and all of your dad's brothers, right, as the same way you would a father figure, right, that also means that you aren't limited also in, right, like, who you can get support from, etc., right? Like, there's more mobility too in that sense, right? Because it's more communal, right? Because everything is about for the whole communal group to continue on. So it wasn't so much that they didn't see themselves as fathers, it's that they all saw themselves as fathers to many, right? But the importance of, like, so this is something that in the early modern period, in the late medieval period in France, right, becomes La Querelle des Femmes, right? La Querelle des Femmes is essentially a debate that happens about the nature, quote unquote, of women, right? It's very, one could say, coded by a particular type of politics today, for sure. I could see that, where essentially it wants to create a dichotomy of women. But one of the reasons why is because you have the chastity crisis, right? It's this thing where now paternity becomes something that society is fixated on, because now you have everything being passed down by way of the father, right? So once property is passed down by way of the father, through the law of primogeniture, like in England, right, to where the eldest son gets 100%, right? And this was the case right up until really the 20th century. Definitely the 19th century, for sure. Like, from then all the way until the 19th century, is that then who your son is, right, for the father becomes important, because if they're not your son, right, quote unquote, right, and this is where you begin to also see people thinking of children as property, right, like, as something that belongs to them personally, because they are bounded with property now, right? There's those things too. And again, you could look at this. This is also in the laws of coverture. Why it's called coverture is because before, the way how things had worked was, women, if they were to inherit something from her parents or from her family, she would be able to keep it even if they got divorced, right? But under the laws of coverture and things like that, everything, like as soon as you got married, right, everything you had the right to own, right? That is to say, like your inheritance and all the stuff you did own, 100% of it became the property of your husband. That is why the only women that we know of that like ever got to both be wealthy and to live in an existence where they could pretty much do what they wanted to, like career wise or whatever, was if they didn't have any male heirs closely related enough to them that could inherit or claim claim coverture over her, right? And the reason why I almost said ownership is because in a way that's kind of how it works as well, because even a teenage boy who isn't of majority yet, which is 21, would have more rights to everything that a woman owned than the woman who is educated and everything, right? So again, it's because and this is why you begin to have these things bounded up in property and material relations, right? So Bronze, you didn't own your farm. You either roam as a gang, right? Exactly, and you live and die together, or you work a farm that your lord owns, right? And that's the reason why too, like that relationship that's described in the Bible is often one that has to deal with people that live in both, right? Like it can't be exclusive to one. That's why some people have said that that you can see the metamorphosis of the Jewish Bible, right? As I've kind of described it, from a tribal society to a slave society. Because it has things like, and even when you get to like the Christian Bible with like the sayings of Jesus, right? But even just sticking just to the Jewish Bible, you have things like, oh, right, like leave parts of your trees, leave the fruit of those trees for passersby, blah blah blah, right? Like things like that, or apportion a certain amount to the descendants of Aaron and Levi, right? Blah, stuff like that. So, speaking of treating children as property, James Dobson. Ah, I see. One of the first modern transgender people in Britain was a guy who was child of a noble house, and everyone was fine with him being a guy. And then his older brother died, and he stood to inherit land and money, and suddenly the calipers come out, and his family tried to debate inherent nature. That's often something that does happen, and it's sad how, again, a lot of people, like, this was often a thing about modernity, too, like, earlier when, Gengaros was asking, and don't worry, I will get to the other stuff as well, that people are seeing. And hello, it's nice to see you, Estelle. Is that, when it comes to, a lot of people discussing, like, identities, right? A lot of people's identity was, like, they preferred a pre-modern existence of those identities, and why they sometimes might even had, like, a kind of reaction. I won't necessarily say reactionary, but definitely some people did, for sure, view that, like, this creation of gayness or whatever, right, they saw it as a step in the wrong direction for themselves, because then that meant that they had to, right, make a decision, right? Like, now they do have to call themselves something. Now they are going to be identified as something. Whereas before they were actions, now it's a whole mode of existence, right? And I'm not saying that that's how most people would view it today. I'm saying there are people that did view it like that. Those were the two options, right? So, in my family, I grew up. I partially raised my grandparents. My father was only for half of my childhood. My grandmother and mom mostly raised me, hence strong connection as a guy to women. Okay. My mother and father separated without legally divorcing each other. My mom briefly dated before my father being allowed back into the house. We didn't have a standard nuclear family. Yeah, I mean, that happens a lot. And then that also means that, you know, like people also have just a different relationship as well, with how kind of an understanding how, again, like the standard nuclear family is not as standard or doesn't have that like the sort of force, right, that the strong nuclear force, one might say, right, that to hold it all together. So and their husband or father died, right? Yeah, exactly. Unless their husband, or if they didn't get married, but yeah, if their father died, like that's why, again, you have like George Eliot, right? Well, you have people like Beatrix Potter, right? Which was sad because she actually did want to get married. It's just that he passed from, oh gosh, what was it? I believe it was tuberculosis, but I'm not sure now. Chances are it was tuberculosis, considering it was Britain at a time when there were a lot of people dying of consumption.
Are now and try to figure out what's going on with them. When I'm not bogged down in research for one of these videos, you might think I'm doing something otherwise intellectually stimulating. You would be wrong. I'm watching British reality TV. The other day I was going to watch Come Dine With Me with my girlfriend. If you're not familiar, 4 people each take turns inviting the others to their home for a meal. They rate the experiences and whoever scores highest gets £1,000 cash.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, no. No, I do not want to watch this. Well, I don't know, maybe I would watch it. Maybe I would watch an episode. But oh gosh, the idea of that, no.
The kicker is that the producers almost always make sure one of the 4 people is insane, and they have a colossal crash out by the end of the week. Come Dine With Me and other British reality shows are readily available on YouTube for people in Britain, but I'm in Norway. That's where Surfshark comes in. Thank you, Surfshark, for sponsoring this video. Surfshark provides a VPN service that allows you to access region-locked content all over the internet by connecting through one of their 3,200 different servers in over 100 different locations. If I want to watch Come Dine With Me, I'll connect through a
That's intellectual what? UK TV is awful? Yeah, I don't know.
British VPN server, and then the service thinks my traffic is coming from the United Kingdom instead of Norway. Same applies for any streaming platform of your choice like Netflix, Disney+, HBO Max, and so on.
Okay.
It's available on mobile and desktop. If you're interested, let's get back to the medievalists.
Please.
First up, Metatron. Luckily, he has...
Okay, Metatron? I don't know. No, I know. First I was trying to do like ethical react, but I'm just like, I can't. I just don't want. Pretty sure everybody that wants a VPN or needs a VPN already has one. I don't know, like, there's just, I don't know, like, I think Fredda might be insane if he's telling the truth.
Provided us with a perfect Rorschach test to figure out his politics and understanding of history.
Was Nazism left-wing or right-wing?
Oh gosh, what? What? Oh gosh. Why is that even a question? That transition was weird, not gonna lie. I mean, it's like Megatron. Yeah. To quote a YouTuber I follow, it's 2025. If you don't know what a VPN is, don't find out from an ad. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, again, like, if you know what a VPN, I mean, like, if you, like, you know, like, there are people's children that know, like, that I know of that know what VPNs are because they want to watch, like, American TV here. You know what I mean? It's like... Megatron is not trustworthy? Okay. But Metatron... I just feel like this question, were they left-wing or were they right-wing? Well, I don't know. Why don't we just reason ourselves to see which one is which?
This question is a form of ahistorical syllogism. In my opinion, there are 2 major...
No, it's not. No. Syllogisms. Oh my gosh. We're gonna do inductive reasoning right now? Oh gosh.
Problems here. One, they use the American left-right dichotomy or political spectrum, and they forcefully apply it to.
Okay, even if that were true, somehow it still is for people in the United States. They think that they have like a real, like actual left-right divide, and that there is a center as well. But actually, it's just like very, very, very right-wing and very, very right-wing, right? It's just like that's it. Like those are your two options, but one of them is not as right-wing as the other, or not as openly right-wing as the other, quote unquote, right? And so they're like, that must be the left because it's not this thing. But really, there should be better terms for that. Yeah, not aware that the Overton window shifted so much, right? Yeah. I mean, like, considering the fact that if you're gonna try to use this to describe the Nazis, like, I don't know, I feel like saying the United States is a little bit their political compass is a little shallow is like an understatement, but okay.
Historical European political regimes and ideologies. Two, they use 21st century political spectra and juxtapose them over 20th century
Wait.
politics.
The core of this issue in regards to this is a phenomenon called presentism.
Okay, well, presentism aside, I don't see how you can put, okay, Benito, Adolf, and Jojo, right? How you can put, the three of them together and just, well, one, the distinctions between Benito and Adolf are one thing, I guess, but they're, fine. Why does this feel like it's gonna go straight to horseshoe theory? Like, by putting the three of them in there, I'm like, I feel like you're trying to say that they're all the same. Or that it's super, super nuanced. It's like it's either one or the other. Right? But like super nuanced in the way that just does horseshoe theory, but by other means. But
He doesn't use that word because it's a word an actual historian would use. Instead, he calls it an ahistorical syllogism. Presentism is a complicated subject, and there's varying definitions and ways to use the term. But
like, yes, like there are people that have used, like, I remember once there was one scholar that was trying to liken things, was not saying that it was the same thing, but was trying to liken, right, using the analogy of the invasion of Iraq, right? Even though they were talking about something in the something that went on in England during the early modern periods around Shakespeare's time, right? Those two things can occur, right? Like you can do that, but they are trying to make a connection that goes beyond just whether we have a different political spectrum than then, right? Because I don't think that's the question at the heart of this, and how they are unique. Yeah, exactly. Because that's one of the main things that even for historians, that if we're going to read something as it were through the eyes of the present, which we always do anyway, right? It's different though if we're going to try to create like an analogy or something, because we still have to historicize, right? So it's like, I don't know, it's a little different. It's not like Megatron, it's Metatron, an angel who is the voice of God. Oh gosh, that's even worse. Oh yeah, you're right. Cause Metatron, that's usually that symbol, right? It's like it's usually like a series of esoteric symbols. Usually involves like a star. Well, people might identify it as the Star of David, but yeah, it's supposed to represent the yeah, because the meta in Greek being like an intermediary, so to speak. it's kind of a dummy question. You ask it to someone to set up a better version of the question. Well, sure. Mustache Man and Mustache Man Italian edition. Yeah. Adolf and Mario, of course.
But one use of the term is to describe the way in which the present exerts pressure on the historian's construction of the past.
Exactly.
You are continually being shaped and reshaped by what you experience and by the society around you. This can push and pull you towards interests, approaches, and methods which can influence or shape the ways in which you approach history. These
Exactly. Like this is the same thing. Like again, what we were talking about earlier. Like when we think about the concept of a family in the past, a lot of people think that families functioned exactly like how they do now. And they don't think about the contingencies, I should say, that have made it so that we conceive of families as we do now, right? Like, what has changed between then and now? Instead, they just assert, well, patriarchy was important then, and they had, you know what I mean? It's like, historians that do talk about things like patriarchy, etc., have to account for the fact that it's how the family structure is and how it exists has changed over time, but how there are certain things which still, right, remain with us, like subordinate positions of certain people, right, based on XYZ things that are either imposed upon them or enforced upon them, etc., right, by edict or by religion or by, right, all of these different things. But it's not, but we're not, but no one is arguing like it's a constant either, so I knew better to trust Angels 2. I've seen Evangelion. I haven't seen it, so
sources, the so-called facts that you observe are all the same, but the angle that you approach them at, the facts you decide that
yeah, this is why you cannot just reason yourself to the truth, quote unquote, right? Like, even, like, again, I've read different books talking about the modernization, the westernization of Japan, right? Only one of them has ever looked at has argued mostly very similar things, but when it comes down to it, essentially argues that it, like, there was a point where Japan was like anti-logic, anti-mathematics, whatever that even means, I don't know.
that are relevant to the history and the ones that aren't are all things influenced by who you are. The issue about this complaint about history that wants to put the historian outside of the historian's context is that it essentially wishes for a history without the historian. You're asking for an analysis of history that stands apart not just from the historian but also from the time in which the analysis is being conducted. A history that exists as an objective and true story to be simply uncovered, untainted by interpretation.
Exactly. Like, this is what I have said for years now, like literally years. The way how I prefer to discuss history is as a series, or even if you want to talk about it in a more grand way, as hermeneutical methods, or as a hermeneutical, right, as a collection of hermeneutical methods that are used, or a hermeneutical method in and of itself. One might say, I'm not, but again, the whole point is that it is hermeneutical. It involves interpretation. It involves an analysis, right? It involves all of those things at the same time. It's like this is the reason why when people want to find the one piece of historical evidence that will prove them right, quote unquote, right, they won't find it, because that's not how that works, right? I mean, you don't have to read like Laboratory Life, among other things, right? Which, Envy, if you are in the chat, in the YouTube chat, hello. I did just mention Latour. But also, yeah, like, it becomes important to recognize that it's like, for example, Hammurabi's code, right? Hammurabi or Hammurabi, however you want to pronounce it. Most people would say, that's the one that says eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, right? Blah, blah, blah. That was the first, whatever, constitution in the world, blah, blah, blah. However you want to put it. However, the issue with saying that this was the first well-known law code, because it was, you see it on this tablet, is, well, one, we know that most of the people in the society that had such a law code were illiterate, and so therefore for them to have known the code would have meant they wouldn't have discerned it from the stone tablet we see it in. But also, to complicate this, is the fact that all of the tablets we have of the Code of Hammurabi do not actually come from, like, a public square, I guess. They actually are from inside of religious sites, in front of temples, where they would have priests, do officiatory sacrifices, right, vis-a-vis or in relation to this code, right? So it's like, then that changes this whole notion that, like, this is how people back in the day used to act or used to think. Because if now it's priests doing offertory sacrifices, right, to the gods, and that's where this law code is being invoked, then it isn't the way how people lived back then, right? It's but I will use logic to solve this riddle. Okay, but logic without truth can send you in dark places. Cults have logic. Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing too, is that the logic as such can not only lead you, down those bad routes, but also another thing is that it also can make it so that you will reason yourself into thinking that somehow that is right, that you are not making any mistakes in your reasoning. And this even goes to what you're saying, right, about how cults have logic, right? It's like, in fact, it's like how, like, even Descartes, right, like, even he, right, says, oh, I have doubted all of these things, and people sort of say that, because I was reading this interesting, it's an introduction to Fear and Trembling by Kierkegaard, and the introduction sort of talks about how, like, but even Descartes says, like, there is, however, a limit to the questioning of everything that I have done, right? To the doubting of everything, because then otherwise, right, then you can in the same way too, as, like, if you keep subjecting everything to your internal logic, well, it becomes subject to an internal logic, and,
This is impossible to accomplish. History has to fit into modern understandings of the world, and this, alongside many other things, of course, might be a point where me and Metatron fundamentally disagree. But I don't actually think so, and I'll explain why later on. To close off this point about history being a conduit between the past and the present, let me quote American historian Ha-Seok Chang. Quote, "Even though history is about the past, history writing is for those who are living in the present. Even if you could climb into Aristotle's head, as Kuhn was fond of recommending, how would you know how to navigate inside it? And if you somehow really succeed in thinking and talking just like Aristotle and his contemporaries, how would you come back and tell the rest of us what you've learned? If you could truly attain this ideal..."
Or, and I would add this in relation to what Chang is saying, how would you even know that you've learned anything? Right? That's the other thing, right, for historians, that we have to ask ourselves. Not only how would we tell you what we've learned, but how would we even know, so to speak, what to learn, or what there is to learn, right? Those are very, very different things, right? Because it does not follow that simply because we can go into the brain of Aristotle, right, that we know what are the correct things to take, to sort of scoop out, so to speak, right, and, like, put in our logical taco, I don't know. But yeah, like, when Chang says here, if you could truly attain this ideal of historiography, if you truly could put yourself in, like, 100% one-to-one within the body and mind of the other person, you would still have to account for the fact that their perceptions, their societal understandings, all of those things would be different as well. So you can't do one-to-one 100% ever. Right? When you say so to speak, it reminds me of Peterson. Oh gosh. Well, me, I just like to qualify all of my statements, because that is something that I think I don't think people should feel bad for doing. I think it's one necessary to qualify your statements, but I do like to say so to speak. But yeah,
of historiography, you would be Aristotle, and we would need other historians to decipher for the rest of us what you're saying.
oh, and this is true as well. Like, oh gosh, who said this? I forget if the person I'm thinking of read this or was saying this. But anyway, what was said was that even if you could, like, you can't know yourself, right? You are the least equipped person to know about yourself. And again, this goes back to when it comes to history, like, there's a reason why, in a weird way, like, historian, like, in order for you to think about your own present moment, in a way makes you the least equipped to understand the present moment, right? I mean, it's almost like, was it Kierkegaard that said this? That life must be lived forwards, but it must be understood backwards, right? And in a way, I mean, although that's cutting it very, cleanly, I do think that there is some truth to that, right? That yes, like, that's how history works, right? That we are experiencing and always going through these things forward, right? But it's always a hermeneutical thing, right? In the same way that with ourselves, it's always a hermeneutical thing, because that's what we do.
The completely faithful history, if one could achieve it, might just be the past itself, like Borges's perfect map that is just the terrain itself and therefore completely useless.
Yep. I actually like this story because it is really interesting at how, again, it's interesting because Borges wrote it at a time when, like, some people thought that so when photography becomes, like, the thing, right, like, is really accepted as an art form of its own, right, and begins to have gallery days just as other art would, there begins to be this time period. And also, I should say, I did study photography for a short while, I will grant, but still, like, what I did learn was still very important, because you learn, like, the history of photography, etc. But what I do remember is that you do have to think about the fact that now you have people that say, well, painting has become too abstract, right? That we don't like the fact that painting doesn't just try to be hyper realistic, right? That, like, it should be trying to do something like a camera, right? When it's like, well, the camera was there to try to do what paintings would do prior, right? Like portraits of people, of landscapes. And it's not that those things are gone. In fact, I personally know a person who lives off of his commissions of painting portraits, right? Which is, very difficult to just do that as your job. But the main thing being that when you see photography becoming as important as an art form as any other, in the realm of high art, one might say, that's precisely when painting is kind of liberated from having to try to do, right, portraiture, landscape art that is trying to give you hyperrealism, right? And that's when you begin to have this experimentation with line and form, right, that completely changes art from then on, right? Because it's no longer about capturing someone as, right? Now you can experiment more. Not that there wasn't experimentation before, but it's very different now, right? Because now you have a camera, and and it's interesting too because when it comes to photography, not even sort of a little bit before that, but slightly after that, this period I'm talking about, kind of like the Regency period in Britain, is when you get, not the Regency period, the Edwardian period in Britain, is when you start to get this desire for, what do they call it? Composite photography, right? They want to make photography, right, seem less hyper-realistic, right? So painting is freed from having to try to make itself as close to realism as possible, right? To just being a one-to-one, which is what essentially you can get with photography. But photography, which already does that, then it wants to move away from that with composite photography, right? And that's what I think is what's, also sort of relates to what we're talking about here, is that that's what history and philosophy and other things are also doing, right? It's like the whole point is not to just do one thing and that's it. If they do only one thing, then that actually is detrimental to that. But anyway. Sunday said this? Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, Sunday did say it yesterday. That's right. Yeah, I just couldn't remember if I can't remember if he said it himself or if he was quoting someone. Yeah, galleries near me have a ton of landscapes and portraits, but a ton of weird and exterior shit. Right, exactly, because, people still people still like portraits and landscapes. That will always be something for painting to do. But now, also, you have the ability to create abstract things that you can't really do with photography, right? Whereas with photography, you can always take a picture of someone that is realistic, right, so to speak, right? And, it's nice.
He proposes the following slogan, quote, "Like funerals, history writing is for the living." The analogy to the map is a really good one. Imagine a perfect recreation of the past. Everyone would be left to sift through all the data points themselves and to draw their own conclusions. We would have all the information available to us and we would know and understand none of it.
Expecting, therefore, 21st century American political ideas to overlap neatly and perfectly with 20th century European political factions.
Dragon. Hope you're doing well. It's good to see you.
In order to come out with an answer is a flawed analytical method.
Yes, trying to figure out if Hitler was a, quote, "I'm with her" guy or a member of the Republican Party.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry, just this image is so bad. Oh my god. Oh, you boy. Mazé. Oh gosh. This is so cursed.
In 2016 is silly, but luckily that is not what historians and others are actually doing when they approach this topic.
What do we do now? Well, to answer this correctly first, we need to ensure objectivity to our analysis.
These guys very often present themselves as, quote, "rational skeptics" who are just presenting the objective facts.
Maoist standard English translation, rational. I like that. That's nice. I like that touch. The little touch of Marxist-Leninism. I'm Vita. Oh my gosh. I know, it's like I thought I had seen a lot of things in my life, but I had not seen that. That was just, oh my gosh. Rational skeptics, I know, with the 3Ks. Oh gosh. I would, people, we've come a long way since the 18th century, but I would definitely love if someone were to create, cause back in the 18th century, they would make, oh, I disagree with this philosopher, so I'm gonna make my own dictionary, but with blackjack and hookers, essentially that, but with one of these. That would be perfect. I would definitely get that. He missed the other 3Ks, right? Exactly. It's like, I want a dictionary. I want to get the Maoist standard translation.
I talked more about this method in my previous video, whereby it was used by a literal out-and-about Nazi. The general gist of it is to depoliticize history as a science, and to portray it as a series of crystallized, unchanging facts, which...
Oh my gosh. The Zoomer historian. Okay, if Narwhali was here, you could ask her the amount of times that we have seen something put out by Zoomer history, like even before his various works of multiple hours of like his almost 8-hour long Mussolini biography video, and among other things, right? Like, you know, because sometimes I like to respond to historians, blah blah blah. That stuff is so radioactive, it's unbelievable. Like, there's nothing you can really watch that isn't just, again, like I said, just radioactive beyond belief. It's, but he always starts with this, like, this is in no way political, and don't ever think it, you know, and it's just like, as soon as someone says, this is not at all political, don't ever think it, well, now for sure this is political, if anything. The Maoist third worldist analysis of... Oh my goodness gracious. Imagine. One thing that has sort of interestingly, if I could even put it that way, sort of reminded me a lot of the period that I was talking about before, where there was the chastity crisis of England, was their obsession with the word cuck and cuckold. Because when they were having the chastity crisis, they couldn't shut up about that. And it's like, at no point in my life was just, like, people use it now to mean, you know, like, if someone loses something, right? Like, if someone loses a match of whatever, like, of chess, oh, you got, like, what are you talking about? They lost. Someone has to lose in chess, right? Unless you truly, truly have, you know. But the only other time was exactly 400 years ago. And that's the only other time period that people have ever... What is the chastity crisis? So 400 years ago in England, there were a lot of pamphlets. There actually was a huge, there was a pamphlet war talking about the nature of women, right? In fact, one of the most famous ones is called Hic Mulier, which is Latin for, you know, well, the woman is here, right? Or here is woman, right? Is the other way to put it. But the point being that it was a debate about whether women were either sex objects, and therefore all whores, or, hence why there's actually a play by John Ford called 'Tis Pity She's a Whore. And I'm saying this because they are the names of actual historical plays, right? Like, I wouldn't just say that word either, you know, just... Because this is obviously, we still have this whole thing now, right? Or where they love objects, right? And this was this was a battle of two discursive traditions, the Petrarchan and the Ovidian discursive tradition, right? So if people know Petrarch, right, he famously wrote sonnets. It invented the sonnet, really, in 13th century or 14th century Italy, about this young girl named Laura. We won't go into all of that. You don't need to know anything else about Laura, just that he wrote it about Laura, because I don't want to go into any of the background of that right now. But anyway, he made poems, and those poems were like, oh, your eyes are like, you know, your eyes are like the sun because they gleam, and blah blah blah, you know, your eyes are like stars, your hair is like gold, you know, your lips are like rubies, you know, like all of this stuff, right? So it's putting women up on a pedestal. At least that's how it's constructed in that Petrarchan form. The opposite was Ovid in his, well, multiple works, but in certain of his discourses, where, again, and this is what's funny too, it's like think about like ancient Roman red pill content, Like, imagine that, but it's all in, like, it's all in, uh, iambic, no, well, not even iambic pentameter, because it would have been what? It would have been, well, it would have been in heroic verse back then. Anyway, I don't even know why I'm getting into the details of that, but the point into the meter of it all. But the point being is that he would make all of the women be like, oh, they would get married, but they would end up cheating on their husbands, right? And would end up whatever, blah blah blah, right? And so it essentially, he was famous for always, and so the reason why I called it Red Pill is because it was always framed as an older guy who is like, he knows the truth about women, quote unquote, right? And this idealistic young man who is actually in love with women, right? In love with a woman, and he's naive, right? And so then the whole story is, oh look, women are blank, right? And so that is where this discourse starts. Then they add on top of that was where the changing of, the material conditions in England in particular, where again, as I was saying before, property was then inherited by one person, right? The eldest son, because of the rules of primogeniture. And that meant that whoever you wanted to know they wanted to know that your wife was chaste, because if she slept with someone else and you raised the baby, right, that was seen as wrong, right? And this is where a lot of the morality, this is why, like, when people say it's traditional or goes back to whatever time period, it's like, it really doesn't, because how Ovid wrote about it 2,000 years ago and how people thought about it 400 years ago are two very different things. But still, it started actually off in France with Le Roman de la Rose, with Guillaume de Lory and Jean de Monts. And Guillaume de Lory writes the first part of Le Roman de la Rose, which means the romance of the rose, or the novel of the rose. And he writes it all in a Petrarchan view, right? And then afterwards, decades later, Jean de Monts comes in and he adds the Ovidian one. And he's the one that says, oh, women are all this, women are all that, blah, blah, blah. And so that's where you start, and then that's what leads to La Querelle des Femmes, which leads to the chastity crisis, which I've already described just a bit before. So it's interesting to me that this chastity crisis led to something, was at a time when, capitalism was in a more nascent stage, as property relations began to change, right? And, everything became about primogeniture. And the fact that now it's so ubiquitous here as well, because then it makes me think like, oh my goodness gracious. Oh, thank you so much, Paul Squall. I discovered I have a Roman aversion. Well, in the humanities class, hearing Roman Empire brought up and just would make me snarly angry. That makes sense. Charlemagne was a power bottom. No, I will not elaborate. That makes sense. That makes sense. Let's see here. No, the third... Oh, the Maoist... Oh, I see. We're gonna call them Madonna. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we can, over the years, over and over for 400 years, pretty much. All women are queens if she reasons she's a thought. Some things never change. Yeah, pretty much. But see, like, the thing is that, like, these pamphlets... See, the reason why this is actually interesting, if you want to do, like, want to learn queer theory, like, if you really want to get into, like, queer history and stuff, this is a really good spot to, like, especially if you don't necessarily want, like, if you're not necessarily, like, know a lot of, have yet to learn other languages, like, because all of this is written in English, right? Like, that is to say, the pamphlets during the chastity crisis in England, right? it is an older form of English, but you know, it's like you can see where people begin to. I mean, there are even plays like The Changeling. You have like The Alchemist. You have again, "'Tis Pity She's a Whore" by John Ford, right? All of which deal with these. Well, I mean, you also have "As You Like It." You have "Twelfth Night" by Shakespeare, right? You have all of these plays that are all about women that have to take on male clothing, right? Which is, you know, well, you know, if you want to describe it like that, or a lot of times it's described as that way, right? But like with Twelfth Night, right? You have Viola, who becomes Cesario, right? Who then the Duke of Illyria falls in love with Viola Cesario, but when they get married, when he finds out that Cesario is actually Viola, he's like, I still want you to dress up like Cesario, though. You know, like, he's like, yeah, I don't want you to be Viola, I want you to be Cesario. You know, and it's like this really weird thing, because then, like, the twin brother and anyway, there's a whole, there's a lot. But you really read it for Feste. You want to read it for Feste, because that's what you do. But with, like, As You Like It, I mean, you have one part where you have one character that cross-dresses as another character who is cross-dressing as another character, right? And I'm using that term, again, as it would have been said in relationship to the play, not like, oh, this is, you know, because I really don't like, but like that's typically like it will say it in the stage directions, right? Like blank cross-dressed as blank, right? But it's a weird thing when you have someone that is dressing as another person who's dressed as another person dressed as another person, because then it's like, well, at what, especially when at one point in the play they are cross-dressed as the actual person they are pretending not to be. So they are dressed up as the person dressing up as someone else, who is a person pretending not to be who they are. Right? So it's like, I know it's confusing, but there is a really good version of this one, and maybe we might watch it one of these community nights, that takes place in medieval Japan for whatever reason. It doesn't make any sense because none of the characters are Japanese. They just said it in medieval Japan for some reason. It's just really awkward, but still, it's very good. It's very good. But yeah. Life is a chastity crisis. England said, yeah, I know, right? Metadrag, like Metatron, but for ascending cross-dressing. I mean, yeah.
Just so happen to correspond to the person's worldview. You assert things as, quote, just the facts and reason your way towards why these so-called facts you're presenting are true, without relying on much evidence produced by trained historians. You sidestep the actual debates and uncertainties of history in order to simplify the larger picture. The point is to cleverly avoid actually engaging with history and instead relying on debate and argumentation. I've talked about so-called objective history in past videos. I'll summarize by saying history is aspirationally objective, but practically cannot be objective because the fundamental nature of the field necessitates all sorts of selection and interpretation that cannot be fully divorced from subjectivities. Here's a quote by E.H. Carr from his book What is History? Quote, "The facts of history cannot be purely objective, since they become facts of history only in virtue of the significance attached to them by the historian. Objectivity in history, if we are still to use that conventional term, cannot be objectivity of facts, but only of the relation between the fact and interpretation, between past, present, and future."
Focus on attitudes towards private property, individual freedom, and wealth redistribution patterns.
I mean, even the idea of an individual is just... And I'm sorry, like, I just feel like if anyone's gonna be like, let's logic our way to think through whether the Nazis were left-wing or right-wing, I don't think you need to logic anything. I think you can just, like, read, like, I don't know, all of the evidence,
If needed, even implementing a mathematical apparatus.
What does he even mean by this?
Also, we should explore and take into consideration.
Yeah, what does he mean by that? Wait, I need to hear that again.
Focus on attitudes towards private property, individual freedom, and wealth redistribution patterns. If needed, even implementing a mathematical apparatus.
What does he even mean by this?
A mathematical apparatus for what? for determining whether the Nazis are left wing or right wing, or history in general. What is that mathematical apparatus? What does that mean? Like, I don't know. As soon as I hear the word math or the term mathematical apparatus, I immediately think of just calculator. I don't know why. It's just like, what can I do? What history can I do with a calculator? You know. How will we work out what the people of the past wanted? How could we read the things they wrote or review their crop yield data? Or instead, we could use logic and reason. Exactly, like... gosh. I said it as Lucy was watching one of Fredda's other videos, but I wish Fredda would add a bit more context to the books he's citing. How they are an authority and the thing that he's citing them for. Oh, well, E.H. Carr, he's well known for, as a historian, but also as sort of like books. I mean, his book, What is History, is really good, where he's sort of thinking about like epistemology and methodology when it comes to history, right? But yeah, I totally agree. I do wish there was a bit more to that as well. Like E.H. Carr, who wrote the book Blank, which talks about blank, you know, just something, I don't know. Using boy math to work out whether the Nazis are right-wing or not, right?
Also, we should explore and take into consideration the political allegiances that occurred historically and the sort of opposition to the regime in question, the Nazis. So let's do that.
Now, he says we're going to evaluate whether these regimes lean left or right based on those criteria, but first he constructs a new category called totalitarian dictatorship.
What defines totalitarianism? Centralized authority, strength in the military, militarism with resources directed to domestic population. Authoritarianism.
I mean, centralized authority, okay, well that's just a state. Strength of the military, a state with a standing army, great. With resources directed to the... What does this mean? I mean, definitely, this definitely sounds like the United States so far. I doubt, to people who don't know much about the... Yeah, exactly. Authoritarianism and dictatorial rule. Well, this needs to be defined for sure. Like, all of these isms have to be defined. Like, you can't just... Because, I don't know. Like, this word is used, the authoritarianism is used to mean a lot of things. And dictatorial as well. Like, what do you mean? Like, for example, some people would not classify Mexico's 70-year dictatorship as a dictatorship because technically people showed up to voting booths. And even though there was only one choice, and they changed the person sitting in the fancy chair, right? That means that somehow that wasn't a dictatorship. But we know that people putting ballots in a box, or putting pieces of paper in a box, and only having one choice, does not a democracy make, right? Like, ballot boxes do not make a democracy as such, right? So... Fascism is when government. Oh, we're using fancy Leah. Oh my gosh. As long as he doesn't come out like citing like, I don't know, like Rothbard or something.
And dictatorial rule, repression of freedom of speech and freedom of the press, systematic elimination of political opposition by violence, expansionistic foreign policies, and conquest through military might. Already.
Okay, this just sounds like the United States. I hate to say it, but like if like the only thing that people might say is like, well, the United States doesn't do this for freedom of speech because it allows like people to say horrendous things on the internet. And it's like, if that's the bar we're setting, that's the lowest bar I've ever seen. That is a very low bar. I mean, when it comes to freedom of speech.
Note that all three historical totalitarian regimes of the 20th century fit very neatly within this box.
Wait, there were only three? There were not only three. There were multiple on the way. Well, one, I'm sorry, you have to include Tsarist Russia in there, even though it ended a little early in the century. It still was horrific. And let alone just all these other, just like Imperial Japan, I mean, Imperial Japan isn't even on there. When it's like, do you know how many people were Robloxed, right, in the process of them essentially, like, there was a divide at one point, and I do think that Dr. Sarah Payne does overstate it to some extent, that it was a divide of whether the, well, okay, I'll just put it the way how she puts it, because the way how it sounds makes it sound, the Japanese forgot that they lived on an island. That's literally how Sarah Payne just says it. Like, I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but not by that much. She literally says, like, they had forgotten that they lived on an island, and I'm just like, excuse me? How do you forget you live on an island? Like, as Japan, like, it just doesn't even make sense, but okay. Don't talk to Metatron about commies. He gets really upset when historians say, don't say the Soviet Union was the way it was because communists were inherently evil people. It's funny you say that, DJ, because there is one part of Dr. Payne's one of her talks with Dwarkesh Patel, where he tries to do this thing that a lot of people that try to be like, oh, I'm actually like apolitical centrist, whatever, where they try to be like, well, weren't the Soviets, wasn't Stalin worse than Hitler? Or weren't the Soviets worse? It's like, can we please stop doing this? Like, stop. And even she's like trying not to, you know, be mean in any way, but he doesn't stop for like he tries a few times, like, but wouldn't you say that, you know, would happen, you know, like, that was malicious what the Soviets did? And I'm like, as opposed to what? Like, what else? Like, what would you call what the Nazis did then? Like, if you're gonna only use malicious for the Soviets, like.
Back to his definition of totalitarian dictatorship, it has numerous issues. Imagine a brutal and repressive dictatorship that for one reason or another is incapable of carrying out expansionist foreign policy. By his definition, this may not be a totalitarian dictatorship because it's not invading its neighbors. Now imagine a dictatorship that does—
Well, yeah, I mean, that's Mexico. Mexico was a dictatorship with centralized authorities, you know, but it just didn't invade because we're a neutral country. You know, like... Okay, see you later, Godspeed. This just...
does carry out belligerent and hostile foreign policy and even invades countries, but doesn't actually annex these countries, instead leaving puppet regimes in their wake. Maybe on the other side of the planet even. They wouldn't fit the bill. The only really good criteria on this list that is practically useful in any sense is, quote, dictatorial rule. It stands to reason that for something to be a totalitarian dictatorship, if such a thing exists, it must of course be a dictatorship. Beyond that, the definition is so broad as to encompass virtually every nation on Earth. Most states engage in aspects of these—
Right, exactly. Exactly, like, so many military juntas... Chile, like, oh, they just, you know, it's the same thing with like, oh, like, is it okay? Like that's the thing. It's like, it's this weird thing where everything becomes this, like, they're better than X because they didn't do Y. And it's like, they're all bad. It's all bad. Like, Mexico being a 70-year dictatorship is bad. Right? Like, same thing with all of the other dictatorships, right? Like, you don't have to exclude one because it doesn't do the one thing. Like, Argentina having successive juntas, right, that had, like, some years of, you know, time in between, and Mexico having 70 years of one-party rule. They're both bad.
These things to varying degrees. The degree to which you believe any of these specific points apply to any specific nation is completely down to your personal understanding of these terms and the nations. You personally have to make an assessment of how strongly you feel that a nation has enough of these things to qualify. This isn't the kind of objective measure he portrays it as. To demonstrate my point, he says he'll prove that these three nations fit the bill, and to do so he literally just goes down the list and makes an assessment and says that they do. He does a little, quote, thought exercise to prove that 1940s Germany didn't have freedom of speech.
And I will show, well, let me prove it to you. Let's do a little thought exercise. You are in 1940s Germany.
Wait. why would you need to do a thought experiment to know if there were limits of freedom of speech in Germany? Like, there are so many books written about this, so many articles, so many, like, even just reading one book, like, by, like, Sir Richard Evans, like, even just the Nazis in power would literally tell you the answer to this question. I just don't see the point of the thought experiment.
Agree with Adolf Hitler's opinion, so you go to Berlin and in front of the whatever government building that they have there, you say, Hitler was an idiot. Yeah. Do you think you're going to survive that?
This isn't how you...
What? Okay, that just doesn't even... What? You say a random sentence in front of the Reichskanzlei, and you think you're good? I mean, we know there were people that literally were willing to sacrifice, do the ultimate sacrifice to be against the regime, and you didn't have to be in Berlin. So already, just with that alone, you don't have to go to Berlin to say that. You could have said it anywhere in Axis-occupied Europe. And I think it's funny how, like, he also has to say the most mundane thing. Like, Hitler is an idiot. Like, I'm pretty, like... Yeah, that's what someone who really disagrees with Hitler is gonna say if they're in front of the Reichskanzlei. Like, let's look at protests and see how they were handled rather than rely on our preconceptions. Exactly. Like, again, like, there were outbreaks of violence in, like, I mean, let alone, again, even if you were to just look in Germany, there were ones that happened in the Ruhr, right, in Mannheim, if I remember correctly. There were some in what is now Pomerania, and even in Berlin. Like, I mean, like, this idea that, like, nobody resisted, or that nobody, it's like, the issue is that people did resist the Nazis this whole time and did say things that, right, that's how they ended up in places like Oranienburg or, Dachau. Like, Dachau was not an extermination camp. It was a concentration camp, but it wasn't a death camp. And it originally housed political prisoners, and then later the incapacitated / disabled, right? As a lot of times how they will word that. Right? So it's like, you already have people that were sent to places like that because they built Dachau in 1933. So, yeah, it's just a weird...
You work with history. You don't think your way towards an answer, you find evidence to back up your claim. His argument here is 100% reliant on your personal understanding of Nazi Germany, not related to any evidence whatsoever. His argument is compelling because you understand Nazi Germany to be oppressive, and you're right, but he's not actually teaching you anything.
Well, I would hope most people would understand that Nazi Germany was oppressive, right, to everybody, right, even the supposed selected few, right, quote unquote, right, that would have. I mean, it was always a murderous mess, right? But the point being that, like, the issue is that you have a lot of people that don't think it was that oppressive, right? Or that don't mind certain kinds of oppression so long as they don't think that they would have been oppressed, right? Like, it's a whole different aspect if they think that they would have been part of the Herrenvolk, right? As opposed to if they are part of the marginalized, or if they're the acceptable part of the marginalized, right? With however you want to word that, pick me, etc., right? But it's only if you think Nazi Germany because again, if you're saying they had a disagreement with Hitler. Well, there were people that disagreed with Hitler from the right. I mean, like Julius Evola, right? Julius Evola famously said the problem with Nazi Germany was that it was too progressive, right? I don't think there's anybody I know of that's what they think of when they think of like that. Oh, the problem is, see, that it was a progressive, whatever. Like, I don't think Nazi Germany really, right? But if you would have asked him, Julius Evola, and a lot of people that fall into that I don't know, that turnpike of thought, I guess. You do get people that say that, oh, it was too progressive because it did this and that, blah blah blah. Which obviously it was not progressive. But, like, I hope people, but yeah, I don't know. So much of a lot of American history. In fact, even Dr. Payne does this, and this is something that she does bring up both in her book, but also in her talk with Duarkesh, is if Hitler had been okay with just blah blah blah, right? This is the general setup. And this is how it's also taught in U.S. schools, that if he had been satisfied, right, with the Anschluss and Czechoslovakia, etc., that then it would have somehow been okay. When it's like, no, it was bad from the beginning. Like, it was bad from before he was in power. The fact that he took power makes it even worse. So this whole, like, oh, if he would have been satisfied at this point, it would have been okay. No, that's not how that works either. It was always bad. There was no good part of that history. So there's that too. But yeah, I get what Fredda's saying here. But yeah, like, again, it also depends, like, how you're taught this history.
He's saying, you believe this, therefore my point stands. This isn't history. He's pandering to you, and even though what he just said was correct, it is still pandering.
So what this tells us is that these are not necessarily unique features of the right or the left, but they manifest as common ground on the extremes of said spectrum. It's the horseshoe effect.
Oh gosh. You've gotta be kidding me. You've gotta be kidding me. This is so... I'm seeing a rise in MAGA saying that they think we're on the wrong side because Hitler was often speaking about the Bible. They enrage me with their dogmatic ignorance. Oh, for sure. I mean, like, seeing the amount of people that have tried to do very similar things right now when it comes to what's happening in Palestine with, that try to claim, like, Jewishness and, well, I shouldn't say claim Judaism, right? Like, in the religious, right? When they try to do that, like Netanyahu, etc. Yeah, like, it's unbelievably enraging. It's beyond, because, yeah, I don't even know what to say, but I mean, like, yeah, like there are people that will bring up the fact that he said, like, oh, I believe that I am blah blah blah, like, fulfilling my sacred mission or whatever, blah blah blah, for Christ or whatever. And it's just like, if this was a public statement, remember, he was not exactly known as, like, being an honest person, right? Like, his whole point was he would do anything to put himself into power before he got into power, and then afterwards he was known for propaganda up until, like, the very end. I mean, that's, like, all he's known for. So yeah, like, this whole, but if he would have been satisfied, oh yeah, as if the drive that pushed him to that point would simply stop at the point right then and there, when he was getting more and more successful. Exactly. Like, that's the thing. Like, Operation Barbarossa and then Operation Typhoon, etc. Like, those things were not done. Like, he didn't continue on because he's like, oh well, I've reached enough Lebensraum for now, right? Like, oh, I've reached, like, he didn't do a cost-benefit analysis or however you want to go through that. The whole point was, well, he was able to make such quick gains in the Soviet Union. His whole point was to take over the whole thing, right? And he hoped that Japan would have joined in, so that way the Soviet Union would have had to fight a two-front war instead of Germany. But of course, they had negotiated, a non-aggression pact, which up until the very end, when the Soviet Union in effect broke it. Although some people would say, well, was it justified? Was it not justified? I mean, I don't know, but I mean, I would have to go more in depth on that, because that is its whole separate question. But anyway, like this belief that like, oh, had he been satisfied with just like the Baltic states or Belarus and Ukraine, it's like obviously not, because that's why he changed certain movements. That's why he attacked on three fronts, right? Three prongs, right? The Leningrad, Moscow, and then first Kiev, and then later on to Stalingrad, right? And it's like the whole point was to keep going, was to go to the very end. It wasn't to like, oh well, we're going to, once we've reached the perfect limit of how much land we need to do what we wanted. No, the point was they wanted to do settler colonialism on the European continent. So they would have always needed excess land anyway. If you could even be, which even discussing it like that means that just shows you how much violence would have been necessary to create quote unquote excess land, right? A lot of violence, right? Like beyond what we saw, what we have already seen, right? But this horseshoe theory is just ridiculous. Like, one, it views these socialism and communism as two, but like liberalism still likes to consider itself as beyond ideology, right? Like, oh, we are not ideology, right? And it's like, no. The fact that you don't think your ideology and keep couching yourself or keep discussing yourself as though that's true is like kind of proof you are, but
Extremes touch, even if, ideologically, when compared with communism, fascism is indeed right-wing.
Horseshoe theory is complete bunk. It relies on surface-level similarities between certain right and left-wing regimes in history. I don't think historians put much stock in the idea, instead opting for a more nuanced and holistic analysis that doesn't...
Well, yeah, Fredda is right. Like, I don't know any historian of the 20th and 21st century that has ever put any stock into horseshoe theory. And that is to mean that it's contemporaneous to now, right? Because I don't want to be like, well, this person from like 1901 he thought of it. No, maybe, perhaps, but again, no scholar now that I can even think of any, because it's again, it is surface level. That's why it uses like basic. I don't know if these things are still the case, but like, like the things that sometimes you were given as like a toddler as toys, right? There's like a triangle, a circle, and it has like a little stick attached to it, so that way you can stick it like, like you're supposed to put it into the piece of wood, right? Like match it shape to shape, right? Like one of those was always a horseshoe. So I always saw it as one of like the basic shapes of the world because of this. And so when I think of horseshoe, I think of like it's one of the basic shapes of the world, So I think of it in that way, right? That it's like it's something that is very easy to place, right? To superimpose things upon, right? Because it's like, oh, it's very easy for people to understand. Not because it has any, validity in any real way, but merely because it's a very basic way of explaining the fact that these things are separate, but are related in some way, right? I suppose.
and entirely sideline the ideological differences between these regimes. What Metatron is actually observing isn't the similarities between right and left-wing extremes, but the similarities between two different regimes wielding state power. The reason I think that the horseshoe theory is compelling is that both Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union were ideologically opposed to democratic liberalism, which means that those regimes in many ways were both quite different from the ones most of us live under today. The difference from us, is something they both share, even if at a closer look the regimes really aren't that similar. A comprehensive breakdown of the differences between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union is beyond the scope of this video, so I'll move on for now.
Now, in Europe, conventionally, Nazism is generally considered to be a far-right ideology, and communism, which is, of course, a left-wing extreme ideology. But once you start to look at this from the American political perspective, then the situation becomes muddy, if you will, necessitating a...
Wait. But didn't he say in the beginning you can't... That the problem is that people are looking at it from the American perspective? That was his whole, like, a historical syllogism or whatever he said? That's the whole... That's the whole reason why he decided to... That's right, it goes in the square hole. Right, exactly. Just like, yeah, exactly. Exactly, Phoenix Dragon. That's right, it goes in the square hole. Right, pretty much.
More nuanced item-by-item
Also,
approach.
don't worry, we will
If you
move on
recall,
to
early in this video, he said that
consequences.
one problem with this is that Americans are trying to apply their 21st century understanding of politics onto a 20th century European political movement. And now he's saying that because there are differences between Nazi Germany and the positions of American Republican voters, the situation is muddy and Nazi Germany isn't entirely right-wing. Why are you looking at it, quote, from the American political perspective? Surely there must be better criteria than the political understanding of the median American voter. Full offense intended to the median American voter.
You see, the Nazis, for example,
That's right, full offense.
had nationalized healthcare. Government was deeply involved
Oh
in...
my gosh, seriously? Okay. So, yeah, so essentially, this is a, like, gosh, this is a right libertarian view that, like, if anything is, like, when it occurred, it was conservatives that started the nationalized healthcare in Germany. It's not like the socialists, but it wasn't like the KPD were the people that put it into place. It was already there, right? It was via Bismarck, of all people, who apparently never actually liked staying in his own house to the point that it was rat infested. Like, he really did not like going home, which I kind of, I kind of get, like, in a way, like, but also... His house was just, like, dilapidated, and he just, like, never did anything with it. It just had it there. But, yeah.
every aspect of industry. So we're talking about big government. The Nazis were not in favor of free market capitalists. And yes, I'll defend this one in the next section.
What? Okay. Big government. There isn't a modern state today that doesn't have a quote-unquote big government. I mean, big government is how you protect big capital. Like, capitalists need the big government, quote-unquote, because they need the big state. Like, that's the foundation of material relations vis-a-vis, like, capital. Because you have to have the enforcement of contracts, of private property, etc., right? So, this is just very... And free market like... This whole idea of, like, the whole free market thing, like, one, there's just no such thing as a free market. Like, by definition, like, if people would say, well, why don't we just now everything be free? It's like, that's acting as though everything that led up to this point wasn't under some form of manipulation or enforced, right, underdevelopment, etc., which is what happens, like, during the colonial period. Like, when people try to say, well, why doesn't this country, why hasn't it reached the same level of development as random colonial country in Europe? It's like, if you are completely unwilling to consider the fact that colonialism meant, right, I mean, and you have this with Walter Rodney's book, right, how Europe underdeveloped Africa, as well as other books. I know there's a book that responds to that as well. But there are other books on, like, de-development and such, is that that's one of the main things. Like, why was it that when the nation states of Latin America, when they declared their independence, why was it that they weren't able to immediately reach the same point of stability as, and then people will look at like the Dutch Republic. You know, it's like, well, the Dutch Republic wasn't always stable. It took them a long period of time, but they also had that long period of time. Whereas, you know, like Colombia didn't, right? They wanted to do all of the consolidation of a nation state, you know, within decades, with which most countries in Europe did over centuries. So there's that, and also the fact that the natural resources, the trade relations, etc., are all predetermined as well by the prior colonial, you know, state of existence, right? Like before, all of the people that were able to trade had established trade contacts with the mother colony, and now that's no longer the case, right? Now you have to find other people to be willing to buy the raw materials, and again, you're selling raw materials, which are more subject to market volatility, blah blah blah, right? Like, so just that alone, the whole like free market, it's like, okay.
Section. And all of this sounds left of center to an American. So it is.
Does it? Does it really sound that left of center? Free market is as silly as free will. Pretty much, yeah. Hello, Orange Shoe. It's good to see you. Hope weekend's been relaxing. Yeah, been tired, but still, thought I would try to stream today. It's been a while, so I think that the amount of power that right libertarians, or maybe not even power, the amount of just yapping, I guess one might say, of right libertarians that just yap this into existence, right? This whole like, oh, the real conservative position is, or the real right-wing position is like, where you don't give, you know, where, you know, everything is essentially down to like the most basic of property relations. It's like, at a certain point, like, that was possible because of the fact that some like whatever the social safety net that the United States had as a result of the New Deal, among, you know, also with the Great Society, etc., did allow for those consolidations after the fact to take place, so that people could still sort of see benefit where they were, right, at the same time taking away money from those things. But now we're in a situation where it's like, that isn't the case anymore. Most people understand that those things are not big government things, right? I won't say that, or maybe I shouldn't even say most people, a lot of people, right? Definitely a lot more than before, right? Than like a decade or two before this. So to still argue it in this like right-wing libertarian, like Mises Caucus type of way just doesn't work. Like, it just doesn't make any sense. Like, if a conservative government, a royalist government, monarchical, imperialist government was what gave the Germans universal health care, it wasn't a super progressive, like I don't even know.
Mixed.
All of this is, of course, said with zero citations.
On the following section, I'm going to present the characteristics of the regime, and then you decide where it leans the most towards.
As so often happens, these guys pretend they're just presenting the facts, and then they
You know why it's left-wing? Because all of the pictures are in black and white.
pretend to outsource that analysis to you. A historian's job is to provide analysis, not to say, you decide what happened, smiley face, they're being lazy,
Yeah, this happens a lot. This happens a lot where they say, well, you decide. It's up to you to decide what is the truth here. No. that is not how a lot of things work. Like, you can't just say, oh, I'm presenting these things without any bias. Like, it's the same thing that a lot of, like, YouTubers you will see that don't even do this. Like, they don't even talk about history at all whatsoever. But they talk about other subjects, right? Like, even, like, quote unquote drama, it's like they will have this whole like narrative that they are presenting, and then they say, but what do you think of, like, but who do you think is the person in the wrong, as if somehow they were presenting objective facts, right? It's like, no, right? Like, you can't just present quote unquote objective facts. Like when you say, what do you think, you already know what the answer is going to be, right? It's the way how a lot of people understand it, like referenda, right? Or, questions like that, right? The questions in referenda are leading questions, right? Or are begging the question, I should say, are begging the question. So that's another thing too. Like, that's what they're just begging the question. But by also saying, well, it's up to you to decide. It's like the same thing now, right? Where there are other streamers, and I will only bring them up insofar as, like, they keep wanting to make it seem as though whether or not what is happening in Gaza is a matter of personal opinion. It is not a matter of personal opinion, right? Nor is the reports, the evidence, and the actual research done by the experts in their respective fields as pertains to what's happening in Gaza, right? Like with the IPCC's famine classification, they have only declared a famine 5 times in its entire history before Gaza, right? It is very difficult to get the United Nations to ever say that a state like the state of Israel, right, in these liberal capitalist institutions, that for them to actually, to actually be willing to go against what is in effect, right, their chief benefactor, the United States, and actually say that what is happening in Israel is a genocide, etc. But once you had 2 Israeli human rights organizations, B'Tselem and I can't remember the one that's physicians, the physicians one, but I have both of their reports. And like the one from B'Tselem is literally titled, quote, "Our Genocide," end quote. Right? It's like only then did people only then did Western sources, right, like US-based sources, UK-based sources, Australian sources in particular, feel like it was okay for them to start saying it was a genocide, right? But even still, right, the standards of evidence for journalism and history and genocide studies are very different. But even if we were to go one step beyond that, it is not a matter of personal opinion, whether or not right, like someone is or is not, right, hors de combat, right? It is not a matter of personal opinion, right? And what I mean is, like, for these streamers in particular, these YouTube creators, right, like Hutch, for example. I'm only mentioning it because he's the only person that I can think of off the top of my head right now that actually was like, oh, well, the estimates for the amount of fatalities can't be higher than whatever is, like, that it can be disputed by a matter of personal opinion, in effect. And it's like, no. I mean, this is over a year ago when I was doing my own research for a piece that I've written on Gaza, and my own estimation was higher than the one that came out in, I believe it was February of 2024 or March of 2024, in the Lancet. But even using their more conservative side of their multiplier, the amount was still quite large. But it wasn't as large as it could be, which is if you were to multiply it by 15, right? In terms of urban warfare, it can be between 3 times higher and 15 times higher. The known, right, fatality rate. And that's, of course, presuming that all recording and and the death toll is kept up to, that keeps getting updated. The numbers in Gaza have been kept almost nearly stagnant, right, in terms of like the total amount of people. That isn't as though the Israeli genocide of Gaza has somehow gone down in terms of its severity. If anything, it's gone up, right? Let alone it reaching famine, right? A globally recognized famine. So once you have all of these indicators, it becomes a very strange thing to say, well, it's up for the audience to decide, or, oh, well, I don't think it would do this based off of this, right? Based off of just what I think, right? Again, if there is nothing that you can cite or nothing that you can actually argue, right, leads you to believe the other thing. Like, I can cite and say, well, the numbers established by not only the health ministry in Gaza, but also using the numbers cited in the 2 reports by the Israeli human rights organizations that actually state that there is a genocide going on. The numbers that the IDF itself discusses, right? That other organizations. That is how I get to my conclusions, not just by whether or not it sounds like it's a good number or not, right? And this is a very common thing that I keep seeing, right? Again, like, it's like, I don't know why people think that somehow it's advantageous or something, or I really don't understand what they're thinking to discuss the genocide in Gaza. Like, this is a supreme tragedy. Like, this is something horrifying that is happening. And yet, the thing that they always want to do is to, again, turn to the audience and say, well, it's up to you and your own opinion, right? As if everybody is approaching it as a neutral, individual, right? The rational individual a la liberalism. Obviously not. Especially when you spend the entire time, right, deflecting, changing, right, just completely pivoting away from the subject matter, and then denying, if not, and deflecting, right, and like I said, pivoting from the actual subject at hand, right, by saying, well, no, the number can't be that high because the ministry only said this much, but can we really trust it? And, oh, well, we can't actually have a 2-state solution because how could Israel ever trust Hamas? Like, do you realize what you're saying? Do you realize what you're saying when at this point, especially, by this point, you are still arguing those talking points from October 7th and 8th now? Like, that's just ridiculous. So, again, this is the same tactic that's being used here by Metatron. It's this whole turning to the audience and acting as though what they've presented isn't already skewed for one type of response, right? Oh, I've just laid out the facts for you, ladies and gentlemen, right? It's like, no, like, if this were a court scene, right? If this were a court scene in a movie, right? I'll just use a movie, right? People recognize that both sides are trying to get their narrative to win over the jury, right? So if people can understand that, why is it then that they try to pretend like, oh, well, as long as I can reference, well, this says this and this says that, and because I say, well, I want my audience to decide, somehow that absolves me of responsibility. No. That means that you're a denialist with extra steps, right? If anything, right? So, yeah, like, again, this is why, like, a lot of these tactics are almost always used to pivot away from the matter at hand, right? It's people that don't want to actually talk about how to end the suffering of people who literally are suffering in ways we cannot fathom, right? It is not merely a matter of getting aid to them. It is not merely a matter of these are people for whom they will be traumatized by this forever. It is literally, as it were, ingrained upon their psyche and their bodies, right? And this is something that just cannot be, oh well, it is something for the most esteemed audience, right? To decide by vote, right? Like this is not a call-in show, right? This is not like America's Got Talent or whatever, right? Like that's not how this works. You don't get to text Ryan Seacrest, right, at 92127 or whatever it was. You know, standard texting charges may apply, of course, but it's the same type of thing here, right? It's like you're actually avoiding the complexity of the topic, yet trying to act as though you are giving it more depth than the experts of the topic. But I digress. The real left-wing position is the position that disagrees with me. Beat that. Yeah, right? We're going to use logic, but also you have to decide for yourself. So are you actually doing anything here or not, Metatron? Right, exactly. It's also engagement bait. Right, exactly. It is engagement bait. That's true. I've been baking spicy flatbread. Ooh, that sounds good. I've been wanting to make this one flatbread that they make it with, like, sun-dried tomatoes and different, it's like different cheeses. I've heard it's really good. Okay. So, I've seen enough of the whole Metatron thing. It's just annoying, really. Because it just doesn't really help. I guess, like, I really don't know what's the, like, I mean, what Metatron is doing doesn't help. What Fredda's doing, he's doing the correct thing and calling out for that, but it's just, unbelievable. Oh gosh. Okay. Let's see here. Let's see here. Yeah, I don't think that I want to watch the Nuremberg trials. I mean, I've already watched them, but I mean, like, I don't think I want to watch what's his name's Alan Dershowitz's whole thing on them. Oh, Adam Something still makes content? I had completely forgotten about that. Oh well. Then I guess we will just have to do with this. Okay. Okay, everyone. If everyone on Twitch could please get in the machine so we could head on over to Zach's stream. Thank you so much for joining me today. I know it's a short one, but I know it's been a while since I last streamed. Hopefully I can get back into the whole streaming schedule. But yeah, I will be streaming again, usually on weekends when I'm free. But yeah, thank you for joining me. I will see you all later. Make sure to tell Zach hello. And yeah, I will see you all next time. Now, as for the YouTube, You can beat the car's dead bat. What? Oh, yeah. I don't think I can, I don't think I can redirect. Yeah, I mean, like, I get it, like, with Adam, something like, I get it, trains, like, I know, my country is building trains, okay? But now it's just like, I don't know, just like, but, yeah, I'm trying to find the other stuff that I was, oh my gosh, what is this goat doing in there? Anyway, well, okay, so, with that all being said, have a good night, everyone. It was so nice to stream with you. I hope to see you all very soon. As I said, I am going to start streaming more often. So I will start streaming on the weekends, because I do like talking about different stuff. And so yeah, if you'd like to hear more about history and other such things, you can always do so by coming into one of my streams. So yeah, see y'all later.